I knew the air had shifted the moment I walked into the break room that Monday morning. My coffee mug, my mug, was gone. 22 years in that building, and the mug had survived everything. 2 office remodels, 3 CEOs, a small kitchen fire, even the time someone mistook it for a measuring cup during a bake-off. But now it sat in the trash, cracked in half, tossed aside like I was already a ghost in my own workplace. That was the first sign. The second came later that day when Daniel Whitmore, our brand new CEO, strolled through the halls like he owned the oxygen. Fresh off the board's vote, full of buzzwords and expensive cologne. He shook hands with the interns, but barely nodded at the people who'd built the company brick by brick. He didn't look at me once. Maybe that should have been comforting. After all, invisibility had always been my armor. People forget that the quiet ones aren't weak. They're watching, recording, remembering. But something about his smile told me invisibility wasn't going to save me this time. "We're realigning resources," he said at the company town hall. "Future-facing initiatives, bold transformation." Those words never mean what people think. They don't mean innovation. They mean cuts. They mean somebody like me, steady, experienced, loyal, becomes an expense instead of an asset. Daniel started small, the way they always do, canceling recurring check-ins, redirecting my approvals to junior hires who couldn't tell a purchase order from a lunch receipt. Meetings would mysteriously forget to include me on the invite. Little cuts, paper cuts, the kind that don't kill you outright but bleed you slow. I'd seen it before. New leadership storms in, eager to prove they're worth the salary. They clean house, not because the house is dirty, but because they need to rearrange the furniture to leave their mark. And people like me, the ones who fix the leaks before anyone notices water on the floor, we don't make good headlines. So I started pulling back. Not sabotaging, just not saving the day as quickly. If someone sent an urgent email at 6 a.m., I didn't answer until 9. If a contract came in missing signatures, I let it sit on the wrong desk for a day or two. And sure enough, the cracks began to show. A payment cycle delayed, a compliance checklist skipped, a client asking why documentation wasn't ready on time. The little fires I used to put out quietly now smoldered long enough for smoke to rise. That's when I noticed Daniel watching me from across the open office one afternoon, eyes sharp, calculating, like he'd already decided my fate. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't about performance. It was about optics. He wanted younger, cheaper, flashier. He wanted culture alignment. I was just the fossil in his way. I didn't panic. I didn't beg. Because buried deep in the back of my mind was a memory. A meeting from almost 2 decades ago with a junior attorney who rolled his eyes as I insisted on a clause in my original contract. "This is excessive," he'd said at the time. "Good," I'd replied. "Then it won't cost you anything." And so I waited. The termination came on a Thursday morning. Daniel summoned me into the glass-walled conference room, sterile as a hospital. A cardboard box sat on the table, empty, waiting for my belongings. He didn't waste time. "Miranda," he said, voice flat, rehearsed. "We're cutting costs. Your badge. Now no thank you for 2 decades of loyalty. No handshake. Just the script." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just opened my laptop, typed one email, and pressed send. Attached was a single file from my cloud folder. Employment_contract_2001.pdf. To my lawyer. Subject: terminated today. Body: see page 19, clause 14C. I closed the laptop gently like I was tucking it in for a nap. 7 minutes later, my phone buzzed. My lawyer had replied all. Not just to me, but to the general counsel's office, the CFO's assistant, and yes, Daniel himself. Attached was my original contract. Highlighted, annotated, airtight. A clause they'd forgotten. One that stated, in the event of involuntary termination after 15 years of continuous service, all unvested equity shall vest immediately at market value on date of termination. The company stock had soared in the last 5 years. My payout? Just over $10 million. That's when the CFO stormed into the room, face red, papers trembling in his hand. "Who approved this?" he roared. "We can't pay this. We can't afford it." Daniel's smirk faltered. The silence that followed was heavy, like the sound of a trapdoor creaking open under his feet. And me? I just sat there, hands folded neatly, heart steady. Because this wasn't revenge. This was protocol. And they had just activated it. The CFO's voice kept bouncing around that glass box long after he left, like the room was still arguing with itself. Daniel tried to keep his jaw steady, but his reflection in the window gave him away. The kind of smile you put on when a photo is taken just as your chair tips over. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't owe it any words. My phone buzzed again. Another reply. All from my lawyer, clean as a scalpel. Acknowledgement of receipt from legal, request for wire instructions, and a line that read, "Per the contract, acceleration is immediate. No NDA is contemplated." The phrase, "no NDA," landed like a teaspoon hitting a bell. Everyone hears it. Everyone looks up. Let me pause for 1 second since we're being honest with each other. If you're still watching and not subscribed, don't be the executive who trusts a summary slide. Hit subscribe. Read the fine print in your own life. Now, back to the building that suddenly remembered my name. I walked out with the box they'd staged for me, not because I needed it, but because it felt polite to let their story finish its sentence. The hallway did that thing it always does when a quiet person becomes loud without raising her voice. Eyes lifted over monitors, chairs swiveled, a cough that sounded like a question. I kept my gaze forward. The elevator dinged once. Doors opened like they'd been waiting for this moment too. Downstairs, I sat in my car and watched emails bloom on my screen. Legal wanted to clarify intent. HR wanted to discuss alternatives. Finance wanted a temperature check on settlement posture. It's a corporate dialect. A lot of words that never touch the ground. I answered none of them. My lawyer already was. What I did do was text Dana in accounts payable, because decency costs nothing and she'd spent years untying knots I should have been called in the first place to untie. I wrote, "Transition will be handled through counsel. You'll be okay. Backup vendor tokens today." She sent back 3 praying hands and a heart. She always was too generous with emojis. By afternoon, the ripple turned into a current. A former colleague forwarded a screenshot from the executive Slack. Legacy contracts audit. Urgent. Beneath it, someone asked if there were other clauses from the 2000 to 2005 era. That's the part leadership never plans for. If one person asked for a lifeboat 22 years ago, assumption says others did too. The problem isn't me anymore. It's precedent. I made tea at home and placed the cardboard box on the counter. Inside, a stapler, a photo of the office holiday party before the rebrand, 2 pens that only worked if you shook them, and my badge. The badge felt heavier now that nobody could take it from me. I slid it in a drawer next to rubber bands and a tape measure that always retracts too fast. An hour later, my lawyer called. No small talk. He never performs empathy he can't deliver in dollars and enforceable terms. "They'll try to renegotiate," he said, because that's how they were trained. But the clause is clean. Your leverage is time and silence. Let them do the math in front of each other. "Will they go public?" I asked. "They'll try not to," he said. "If they must, they'll frame it as legacy obligations and hope investors appreciate adult supervision. But their bigger fear isn't your payout. It's the audit your payout forces, not revenge," I said. "Protocol." "Protocol," he agreed. I could hear paper sliding across his desk. "You were right to keep the original countersigned copy." I thought about that conference room from decades ago. The junior attorney who told me no one is terminated after 15 years without a soft landing. I didn't argue then. I asked for a sentence in a document and filed it where future me could find it. There's a difference between paranoia and memory. Only one needs evidence. By evening, texts started arriving from people who'd learned my number through the grapevine. Melissa from legal. Are you okay? Can I do anything? Nico, a junior analyst I'd helped with a report once. Hey, not sure if this is related, but I found a compliance discrepancy in HR's classification archives last week. Should I be worried? I told him to send everything to legal with a read receipt and keep his head down. You don't need to be a hero. You need to remain employed. A recruiter I hadn't heard from in years wrote, "Coffee this week?" I laughed. The timing is always precise when people learn you're suddenly interesting. Around sunset, an email popped in from Daniel's assistant, short and chirpy. Daniel would love a quick chat to align on a path forward. Align. Another word that never touches the ground. My lawyer replied before I could. All communications through counsel. 3 minutes later, the assistant asked for my lawyer's availability tomorrow morning. There's a rhythm to panic. It comes in quick asks and calendar holds labeled temp. Here's the part that made it real for me. Not the money, not the reply all, not the CFO's panic. It was a message from facilities, Eddie. He wrote, "Place feels different without you." We switched the light sensors back to the longer timer. People were waving their arms in the dark. I sat with that for a while. The lights only know to stay on when someone moves. Most of my career had been making systems stay lit without any performative waving. That night, I opened my old onboarding folder for the first time in years. The checklists I wrote, the runbooks for outages, the procurement matrix that explained why vendor A could never replace vendor B without a compliance patch. All of it was labeled plainly, not because I'm tidy, but because confusion charges interest. Somewhere in that building, people were discovering that clarity is not a soft skill. Before bed, I typed a note to myself. Not a manifesto. Just a sentence I wanted to carry into whatever came next. Don't let anger rewrite the facts. It's easy to mythologize what happens when the people in charge learn they've been looking past the person holding the safety pins. But nothing magical happened here. I read something everyone else stopped reading. I kept proof. I asked for help from someone trained to pull the right thread. If there's a message buried in this, it's not get even. It's get exact. You don't need to set the building on fire when the wiring diagram is already public record. In the morning, they would escalate to the board. Someone would say exposure. Someone would say fiduciary. Someone would ask who else had a clause like mine. And while they spoke a language that circled itself, I would pour coffee in a mug that wasn't cracked and wait for a wire transfer that wasn't optional. I didn't fall asleep smiling. I fell asleep tired. The particular tired you feel after carrying something heavy for years and finally putting it down where it belongs. By Tuesday morning, the storm had moved from whispers to tremors. I didn't need an office badge anymore to know what was happening inside. Corporate panic has a scent. It leaks through emails, urgent meeting invites, and those accidental BCCs people send when they're typing too fast. The first came at 7:42 a.m. A former colleague forwarded me a screenshot from an internal Slack channel, accidentally posted in company announcements instead of the private executive thread. The message read, "Legal confirms Miranda's contract is enforceable. CFO estimates $10.2 million equity exposure. All departments audit contracts from 2000 to 2005. Urgent." 3 minutes later, someone deleted it. But not before half the company saw it. That's the thing about digital mistakes. Screenshots outrun shame every time. I poured my coffee, decaf because adrenaline doesn't need help anymore, and sat at the kitchen table watching my phone light up like a slot machine. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Miranda, is it true? They really tried to fire you? If you need a reference, let me know." Some of them were sincere. Some were just fishing for gossip. I answered none. Silence was still the loudest language I had. Around 10 a.m., my lawyer called. "They'll try settlement," he said. "Expect a number far below the contract. They'll dress it up with benefits extensions and confidentiality clauses. Don't blink, I won't. I said. My voice was steady, even to my own ears. I'd built 22 years of scaffolding around being steady. Let me pause here, since you're still with me. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed, don't be the CFO in this story. Don't wait until it's too late to recognize what matters. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like. It helps keep stories like this alive. Back to the collapse. At noon, my phone rang. Caller ID, Richard Heller, CFO. The same man who once cut me off mid-sentence in a budget meeting to ask if we could circle back when it mattered. Now his voice trembled like an overloaded printer. Miranda, he said, we'd like to avoid unnecessary escalation. We value your service. Richard, I interrupted, all communication goes through my lawyer. But I hung up. Not because I was angry, but because nothing useful ever comes after but. That afternoon, the first cracks appeared publicly. An industry forum post popped up from a mid-level investor. Anyone else hearing about unexpected severance liabilities at Whitmore Group? Rumor is legacy contracts weren't reviewed. Another asked bluntly, how many Mirandas are out there? The market doesn't care about names. It cares about risk. And suddenly, I wasn't a person. I was a line item with too many zeros. By evening, another screenshot landed in my inbox, this time from HR's internal Slack. Caitlin, the new HR director who'd slid the box across the table, had written in all caps, "Who approved her termination without contract review?" Underneath, the general counsel replied with one line that froze me. "You did." I pictured her face when she read it. The smirk she'd worn during my exit meeting replaced by the realization that the trap door she opened was under her own feet. Dinner that night was quiet. I microwaved leftover pasta and scrolled through my old files. Compliance reports, vendor matrices, the classification audit I'd written last year that flagged dozens of employees miscategorized as contractors. HR had marked it, reviewed, no action. Now I wondered if Nico, the young analyst, had stumbled on the same document. If so, the equity payout wasn't the board's only problem. The next morning confirmed it. A message from Nico. Legal just pulled my audit trail. They know HR ignored classification issues. Everyone's panicking. Am I safe? I typed back, keep records. Say nothing. You'll be fine because panic loves company, but it eats juniors first. By midweek, the board convened an emergency session. I didn't see it, of course, but another accidental forward found its way to me. A draft slide deck. Title, Legacy Compensation Exposure, Preliminary Findings. Bullet points. Clause 14, C enforceable. Estimated liability, $10.2 million immediate. Potential additional contracts, 6 to 12. Risk of investor disclosure high. At the bottom, someone had written in red, root cause, HR bypassed compliance review. Termination executed without legal rooting. That was Caitlin's signature. Her shortcut. Her arrogance. I didn't smile. It wasn't joy. It was inevitability. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights flicker on. 22 years I had been their invisible backbone, their silent scaffolding. They called me outdated, but they had built their empire on the systems I designed, the protocols I protected, the fine print I had the audacity to read. Now those same systems were turning on them. Not because I sabotaged anything, but because gravity doesn't need sabotage. You pull the wrong beam, and the collapse happens on its own. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. Don't get angry. Get exact. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. By Thursday morning, the building I'd left behind was rattling like a machine with loose bolts. I didn't need insider access. Panic has a way of broadcasting itself. Vendors started calling me directly. My number must have survived in some contract appendix. One asked, Miranda, did you archive the back-end tokens? We can't process the payment batch I hadn't. That was never my job. My job was to keep those systems patched, documented, and stable. But when they cut me loose, they also cut loose the one person who knew how to restart the engine when the lights blinked red. By noon, 2 clients flagged failure to provide contractual deliverables. That's corporate language for, we paid. Where's our stuff? Normally, I would have fixed it in minutes. Now I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the notifications roll in like weather alerts. Let me pause here for 1 second. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, don't wait until your own scaffolding disappears. Hit that subscribe button. Stay prepared. Because silence is only dangerous when you don't know what it's holding up. Back to the unraveling. The first public crack came from an industry blog that posted, Whitmore Group experiencing operational instability following senior staff departures. Departures, plural. They didn't even know I was the only one gone. That's how invisible I'd been. One person mistaken for many. That evening, my lawyer called. His voice was calm, almost amused. They're drafting a settlement offer, he said. Expect a round number, maybe $1 million, wrapped in a confidentiality agreement. They think fear of bad press will make you fold. They still don't understand, I said. This isn't about anger. It's about protocol. Exactly, he replied. And protocol doesn't negotiate down. The offer arrived the next morning. $1.2 million, 3 months health insurance, and a non-disclosure agreement. My lawyer responded in 4 words. Clause 14, C, no NDA. Within the hour, Richard, the CFO, called again. His voice cracked like static on a weak signal. Miranda, please, let's be reasonable. If this goes through, the board will have to restructure. Sounds like a governance issue, I said. He didn't laugh. By Friday afternoon, things had spiraled. A junior HR rep accidentally posted a message in the wrong channel again. GC confirms there are at least 5 more contracts with acceleration clauses. Immediate liability estimated at $48 million. Board furious, 5 more Mirandas. I wasn't an anomaly. I was precedent. I thought back to that junior attorney years ago who rolled his eyes at me. Maybe 5 others had pushed back the way I had. Maybe they too had quietly insisted on clauses no one thought would matter. Now those forgotten sentences were landmines under the boardroom table. Dinner that night was soup and bread. Simple. I didn't need champagne to celebrate. Watching arrogance catch up with itself was nourishment enough. As the sun went down, another text came in, from Nico, the junior analyst. They're asking me to explain the compliance report I found. I'm scared. Stay calm, I wrote back. Keep your notes. Don't speculate. Tell them exactly what you saw. Because panic makes people exaggerate, and exaggeration is where scapegoats are born. That night, I sat with the cardboard box still sitting on my counter. Inside, 1 stapler, 2 pens, my badge. They thought it was a box of endings. To me, it looked more like a warning label. Handle with care. Contents may destabilize entire structures. On Saturday morning, I opened LinkedIn for the first time in months. Recruiters, investors, consultants. 173 new requests. One message called me the compliance oracle. Another asked if I'd consider speaking at a conference about operational resilience. Funny how quickly a relic becomes an oracle when the lights go out. But I wasn't chasing validation. I was watching gravity do its work. That afternoon, another email reached me by mistake. A draft memo to the board. Immediate requirement. All involuntary terminations above grade level 9 must undergo compliance review. Effective immediately. My name wasn't on the memo. But I didn't need it to be. I had become the lesson etched into their protocols. As the weekend closed in, silence filled the hallways of the company I'd once held together. No more culture spotlights, no cheerful updates from HR, just a vacuum where their confidence used to live. And Caitlin? The one who'd smirked as she slid that box across the table? She hadn't posted on Slack all week. No memos, no bullet points, no slogans. She'd gone radio silent, likely buried in a war room, trying to invent a time machine that could undo her signature. But there's no undo button on arrogance. By Sunday evening, my lawyer sent me one final text. They've escalated to the board. Expect a revised offer. Larger. No NDA. They're bleeding and want it quiet. I closed my phone, made another cup of tea, and whispered to myself, don't get angry. Get exact. Because the storm hadn't passed yet. It was only circling closer. By Monday afternoon, the building had that evacuated look, even in photos. A friend sent me a picture from the lobby. No chatter, no music, just reflections in glass and the security guard pretending not to notice executives taking calls in the hallway. You can't photograph a meltdown, but you can catch its posture. My lawyer called first. They've moved past negotiation and into triage, he said. Revised terms incoming. Board level sign-off. There was a pause, papers moving. Prepare for full acceleration per the clause, doubled cash to avoid delay, and, importantly, no NDA. Protocol, I said out of habit. Protocol, he echoed like a benediction. The offer arrived 10 minutes later. It wasn't triumphant. It was clinical. Wire confirmation within 48 hours. Benefits bridge without conditions. No confidentiality or disparagement clauses. A line at the bottom. This agreement resolves all obligations under the original contract without admission of fault. I read it twice, then once more out loud. It wasn't an apology. Corporations don't do apologies. They do math. But the math spoke. Let me pause here for 1 second since you're still with me. If you've made it through this story and haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Don't leave your own fine print unread. Hit subscribe, tap like, and tell someone who needs to hear this. Quiet does not mean weak. Back to the signature. I signed with a digital pen that never shakes. My lawyer countersigned, forwarded, and CC'd the people who prefer carbon copies over accountability. Within minutes, a calendar invite appeared. Transition access, 24 hours. It was funny in a tired way. The systems I kept alive longer than some careers now offered me a goodbye tour. I logged into my old inbox for the last time. The flood was immediate. Requests to pick my brain, to share historical context, to help us understand the procurement matrix. I replied to none of them. I wasn't withholding. I was done. I drafted one email instead. Subject line, final note. I kept it short. To Ops, AP, Support, Legal. You'll be fine if you respect process. Document everything. Don't wave your arms to keep the lights on. Fix the sensor. If you're overruled, write it down. If you need help, ask early. Take care of the place. I won't be watching, but someone will. Miranda, I sent it and logged out. It felt like setting down a box I'd carried too long without saying it was heavy. An hour later, another screenshot reached me. An all-staff email from operations. Effective immediately, any involuntary termination at grade 9 and above requires compliance routing and legal review. Legacy contracts to be archived in a central audited repository. Retraining for HR on classification law. No one wrote my name, but it was there between every line like watermarking. Caitlin disappeared from the org chart that afternoon. No grand announcement, just a sterile message from People Ops. We thank Caitlin for her contributions and wish her the best in her future endeavors. I pictured the cardboard box she once nudged toward me. I wondered who slid it toward her. Maybe no one. Maybe the box packs itself when a signature carries enough weight. The CFO called one last time, this time through my lawyer's line. He didn't posture. We've processed the wire, he said. You'll see it by morning. There was a weary honesty to him I hadn't heard before. For what it's worth, this forced us to fix things we should have fixed years ago. It wasn't contrition exactly, but it wasn't spin either. Good, I said. Then it won't cost you anything next time. He exhaled. Fair. When the wire hit, it was numbers on a screen, not fireworks. I made coffee, fed the cat, and paid off the last piece of my mortgage because loose ends are how worry sneaks back in. The money mattered, obviously, but closure mattered more. The quiet certainty that I hadn't needed rage to win. Just records, time, and the right sentence on page 19. Messages kept coming. recruiters, investors, a conference organizer offering to fly me out to talk about operational resilience, which is a poetic way of saying, don't kick out the person who knows where the breakers are. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I let the possibilities sit like tools on a clean workbench, ready when I am. I took a walk past the building that evening, not to gloat, just to make sure it still existed in the ordinary world. It did. A delivery truck idled. Someone held the door with a foot while balancing coffees. Life doesn't stop for board minutes or settlement wires. It just keeps moving, indifferent and exact. I stood across the street and put my badge in my pocket, the plastic warm from my hand. I didn't drop it in their bin. I took it home. A reminder, not a trophy. Here's the message I promised you. The one under the headline and the numbers and the Slack screenshots. Loyalty is a contract, not a personality trait. It should be read, renewed, and respected by both sides. If someone treats your steadiness like a discount, they're telling you the price they expect to pay later. Believe them and keep your receipts. I didn't burn the place down. I didn't need to. The wiring diagram was public. The process was written. The only thing I did was refuse to be talked out of the paragraph I put there to protect a future version of me who might need it. She did. I'm grateful to her. As the sun dipped behind the glass, I thought about that old mug, the one that started this for me. Cracked, tossed, forgotten. I bought a new one on the way home. Plain, heavy, not fragile. When I poured coffee into it the next morning, it didn't wobble or leak. That's all I wanted, really. Systems that hold. People who read. Work that respects gravity. I won't tell you to fight. I'll tell you to file. I'll tell you to ask for the clause. To keep the countersigned copy. To write the runbook as if one day you'll need to hand it to yourself. Quiet isn't weakness. It's alignment. It's the sound process makes when it works. Don't get angry. Get exact. And if someone slides a box across the table, make sure they also read page 19. I was elbow deep in a vendor portal, trying to reconcile 3 different invoices for the same pallet of pressure sensors, when my boss leaned over my cube like a seagull hunting fries. No way we're paying for your little vacation. He smirked, flicking my travel request back onto my keyboard. A $1,500 trip to sit across from our largest client, Soliton Dynamics, and keep a wobbly contract from tipping over. Apparently that was a beach day in his head. Vacation. That's what he called the only face-to-face we'd been offered in months. I smiled the way women in middle management are trained to smile. All teeth, no heat. And said, understood. Then I rerouted a shipment that would have stalled our Denver line, soothed a carrier, sweet-talked a broker, and drafted the escalation email he'd paste into his nightly leadership update. He'd CC the board and I'd get a thumbs-up emoji. That was the exchange rate here. Soliton wasn't a flashy logo. They didn't host yacht parties or post drone shots of their HQ. But their modules powered nearly half of our top-selling product line. Their account was the quiet backbone that paid for the espresso machine marketing forgot to budget. And lately, they were nervous. 3 late deliveries. 1 technical support ticket that sat in purgatory for 12 days. 1 just checking in from their COO that read, in corporate, like, "Are you asleep at the wheel?" I'd been the voice on every late-night call. I knew the names of their line managers, their kids, their allergy schedules. Soliton asked for a short in-person reset. 2 days, 1 factory walk, 1 negotiation. I built a case. $1,500 for an economy seat, a mid-range hotel, and the kind of eye contact you can't attach to an email. I attached risk analysis, forecasts, then the sentence that should have sealed it. This is the last low-cost intervention before they shop alternatives. My boss, Mason, laughed. "They're not going anywhere," he said, and turned back to a slide titled Relationship Excellence. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in the same slacks I'd worn since 6 a.m., listening to my neighbor's dog yodel at nothing. My laptop glowed with flight options and a blinking cursor in an unsent email. I reread Mason's denial. I reread Soliton's "We value continuity." I thought about my team. Good people who thought my ability to fix things was magic, not muscle. The next morning, I asked Mason if he'd at least join the video call Soliton had offered as a consolation. He waved a hand like he was dusting crumbs. "Ellen, send them a deck. Charts." They love charts. Soliton didn't love charts. They loved people who showed up when it mattered. That afternoon, I called Priya, our account lead on paper and my ally in reality. "If we don't show, they'll set a date with Starkline," she said softly. I stared at the request denial on my screen. The word vacation pulsed like a bruise. "Then we show," I said. "Approved?" she asked. "Not exactly." So I booked the trip myself. Coach seat, middle row, hotel that promised continental breakfast, and delivered beige bread. I filed PTO for 2 days and attached a tidy industry conference itinerary I built in Canva at midnight. I ordered 100 cheap business cards that said, "Ellen Ward, Vendor Relations Consultant." Not a lie. Just unshackled accuracy. Before I clicked purchase, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Photos from a plant audit. The one where Soliton's maintenance chief lost his father mid-shift and I covered his line, hairnet and all, so he could drive to the hospital. A thank you note from their COO. Handwritten, "You were there when there was nothing in it for you." I'd kept it, not because I'm sentimental, but because memory is flimsy and proof matters. The day before I flew out, I walked into Mason's office with a one-pager. No color, no swoops. "Soliton is at risk," I said. "If they leave, we miss our quarterly and we don't get them back." "Ellen," he sighed. "Fear-based selling is tacky." "It's math," I said. He smiled at his reflection in the shelf glass and called it leadership. Walking back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, calibration. The click into place when you realize the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And you can either keep feeding it your weekends, or you can rewrite where your effort lands. That night, I packed a carry-on. 2 blazers, flats that didn't punish ankles, the handwritten note, and a printed copy of our service-level history with every red circle I couldn't ignore. I slept badly. Not because I was scared, because I was done being polite about the cost of silence. Soliton's lobby smelled like solvent and apples. Their COO, Marin, met me with a tight smile that softened when she saw my face instead of a Zoom tile. "You came," she said. "Of course," I answered. We walked the line. We listened more than we talked. We didn't sell anything. We fixed small things and scheduled time for big things. Over coffee in a windowless room, Marin slid a folder toward me. Inside, a letter addressed to our CEO. Not a threat, a mirror. It detailed exactly what they needed to stay and what they'd do if we didn't show them we could hear. "Do you want me to courier this?" I asked. "No," she said. "I want you to hand it to the person who actually shows up." On the flight home, I watched a cloud seem the color of a bruise and thought about the sentence I would underline if anyone asked what this story is about. People don't leave companies. They leave the feeling of not mattering. Back at my desk 2 days later, no one asked where I'd been. Mason bragged about a positive touch point he'd had with Soliton. He winked at me like we'd done it together. A week later, the CEO unfolded a letter in front of the board. His expression froze. He passed it to legal. The lawyer looked up and asked one question. "Where is she?" The morning after Soliton handed me that folder, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Marin hadn't raised her voice, hadn't threatened. She'd simply looked at me across a chipped conference table, slid the letter forward, and said, "We need to know someone is listening." That stuck, not the details of the letter. though those were sharp enough to slice through our entire quarterly forecast. But the tone, calm, inevitable, like a tide coming in whether you had a bucket or not. By the time I landed back in Ohio, I'd read the letter 5 times. It was precise. Delivery failures logged by date and time. Service lapses tied to production costs. A closing paragraph that spelled out their next steps if we didn't respond. Starkline and Auron, 2 competitors we couldn't afford to lose ground to. And the signature at the bottom, not Marin, not the COO, but Soliton's CEO. I tucked the folder into the bottom of my carry-on under a half-empty bag of pretzels and went back to work like nothing had happened. No one noticed I'd been gone. My calendar showed 2 days of PTO marked personal, and that was enough for Mason. He was already pacing the floor with his phone pressed to his ear, rehearsing his Q3 resilience pitch for the board. I slid into my desk, answered 3 vendor emails, and opened the Soliton folder again just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the letter spread out beside a mug of tea I never drank. My dog snored under the chair. I tried to picture how this would play out if I handed it to Mason. He'd skim the first paragraph, maybe the second, and then spin it into a bullet point for his PowerPoint deck. Client communication ongoing. He'd write, minor stability concerns. He wouldn't see it for what it was. A warning shot. The next morning, I slipped the letter into a plain manila envelope, wrote confidential across the front, and slid it into my tote. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment. Board meetings always carried a haze of noise. Charts, jargon, people talking just to prove they belonged in the room. Maybe, I thought, if the letter arrived when the noise was loudest, the silence afterward would be deafening. But even before the board meeting, the tension around Soliton was growing. Priya stopped by my desk one afternoon, eyes darting. Did you hear? Soliton's COO canceled next month's webinar. No explanation. I nodded like it was news, though the weight of the letter pressed against my tote under the desk. Maybe they're busy. Or maybe, she whispered, they're looking somewhere else. Mason strutted through the office later that day, announcing, "Don't worry about Soliton. They're steady. I've got it under control." His grin was wide, but his voice cracked on steady. It was surreal, knowing what I knew, holding in my bag the evidence that contradicted every word he said. For years, I'd been the one patching holes before anyone noticed the leaks. Now, for the first time, I wasn't patching. I was waiting. 2 days before the quarterly board meeting, Mason called a prep huddle. 10 of us crammed into a glass-walled room, our reflections hovering behind us like tired ghosts. He clicked through slides, growth charts in gradient blue, bullet points in Comic Sans. "This," he said, "is how we prove stability, relationships, trust, vision." I sat there, silent, thinking of Soliton's CEO writing, "If we don't see change, we will transition all orders to Starkline by the first quarter." When the meeting ended, Mason patted me on the shoulder. "Nice work, Ellen." Thanks for the background numbers background. That was what he called the only thing holding the company's supply line together. On the morning of the board meeting, I dressed carefully. Navy blazer, flats, hair pulled back. Professional, unremarkable. I wanted to blend in until the moment I didn't. The boardroom smelled of coffee and new carpet. Suits filed in with their phones buzzing, assistants whispering in the doorway. Mason stood at the head of the table, chest puffed, laser pointer in hand. "Legacy client relationships are stronger than ever," he began, clicking to a slide that showed a line graph pointing skyward. "Soliton remains fully aligned. We anticipate another 2 years of steady growth." My throat tightened. My tote sat at my feet. The envelope inside. Halfway through the presentation, a courier knocked on the glass door. Tan envelope in hand. Thick, stamped, unmistakably official. The receptionist whispered to the CEO, who took the envelope, puzzled. He opened it, unfolded the letter, and went pale. Silence spread like ink in water. He read once, then again. Finally, he slid it across the table to the lawyer. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning fast, then slow. His jaw clenched. He looked up, scanning faces, and asked a question that made my pulse thunder. "Where is she?" I didn't move. Not yet. My tote was still closed, the second copy of the letter still hidden inside. But in that moment, the balance shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. And Mason? He had no idea his vacation had just walked into the boardroom. The lawyer's question hung in the air like a fire alarm that hadn't decided whether to scream. "Where is she?" Mason blinked, followed the lawyer's gaze down the table, and found me. His expression twitched. Surprise first, then calculation. "Ellen?" he said, as if he'd stumbled onto a stranger in his kitchen. The CEO motioned to the empty chair beside him. "Miss Ward, would you join us for a moment?" I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked forward. My tote felt heavier than it was. I sat, set the bag by my feet, and folded my hands. The letter lay between the CEO and the lawyer like a live wire. "Ms. Ward," the lawyer said, voice even. "Did you attend a meeting with Soliton Dynamics last week?" "Yes." "On company business?" Mason jumped in. Too fast. "She was on PTO," he added with a thin smile as if that settled it. The lawyer didn't look at him. "Did you meet with their COO?" "Yes," I said. "At their request." "What was discussed?" "Performance, missed deliveries, their timeline if we didn't correct course." The CEO tapped the letter. "This timeline?" I glanced at the header. Soliton letterhead. Dated. Signed. "Yes." Mason let out a soft laugh that didn't land anywhere. "Let's not be dramatic. We've had hiccups, sure, but our relationship with Soliton is—" "Please," the CEO said, not looking at him. "Not now." He turned to me again. "Why weren't we informed of this meeting?" "I requested approval for a short trip," I said. $1,500, flights, hotel. It was denied. The room shifted, small movements, the kind people make when they're trying not to be seen reacting. Mason sat straighter. "We denied a vacation request," he said. "This isn't the forum for—" "It wasn't a vacation," I said. Not loud, just clear. It was the least expensive way to keep our largest client from moving their orders. The lawyer slid a copy of the letter to me. "Is this the one you saw?" "It is." I have a duplicate. I reached into my tote, placed my copy next to his. Same folds, same signature, same closing paragraph. "We will initiate transition to Starkline in the first quarter unless we see immediate, measurable change." The CEO leaned back, hands together, face pale in a way that made him look older. "Why did they send this to me directly?" he asked the table, though no one answered. Then to me, "Why did they trust you with it?" I thought of the plant audit years ago, of covering a line so someone could leave to say goodbye to his father, of calling at midnight instead of emailing in the morning. "Because I show up," I said. "We all do in operations, but faces matter when things wobble." Priya, seated along the wall, shifted a notebook in her lap, saying nothing. She knew the ledger as well as I did, where people had quietly paid with weekends to keep lines running. The lawyer nodded toward the graphs frozen on the wall. "Your slide says Soliton is fully aligned for 2 more years," he said to Mason. "On what basis?" Mason opened his hands. "On the basis of long history and my conversations with their team." "With whom?" the lawyer asked. "Emails. Calls. Their procurement." His certainty frayed. "Look, this letter is posturing." They always posture before Q4. The CEO's jaw tightened. "Then why does it include dates and chargebacks we didn't contest? Why does it list response times from our help desk? Why does it reference a video call you didn't attend?" Mason didn't have an answer. He pivoted. If Ellen felt this was urgent, she could have escalated to me instead of freelancing. I kept my eyes on the CEO. I did escalate. Twice. I also handed you a one-pager. The trip was cheaper than the penalty for one missed truck. Silence, then the soft tap of the CEO's pen on the table. How much would it cost us if Soliton shifts volume to Starkline? Conservatively? I said. 7 figures this quarter. More next, once secondary suppliers adjust lead times. We'll spend double to win it back if we can. Can we? He asked. I exhaled. If we act now, yes. Their letter isn't a door closing. It's a door propped open with a brick and a note. We're tired of talking to a wall. They want a person accountable. They want a plan with dates, names, and penalties on our side, not just theirs. The lawyer angled his head. And you believe you can recover this? I believe we can, if we stop pretending charts fix relationships. I paused. They asked to meet the person who actually shows up. I did. They gave me this to make sure it reached the person who could make decisions. The CEO looked at Mason. Why did you deny the trip? He gave a tired smile. Optics, budgets. We have to be disciplined. And frankly, sending an operations manager across the country for hand-holding? It was a domestic flight, I said quietly. 2 days. The cost of one team building happy hour A, director near the end of the table cleared his throat. Enough. He turned to the CEO. What do we need to do right now? The CEO stared at the letter, then at me. Draft an immediate response, he said. From me. Not a form email. A call today. A plan by morning, he shifted to the lawyer. Prepare a temporary authority memo that places Ms. Ward as point for Soliton execution for the next 30 days. Back to me. You'll have what you need. Travel, approvals, resources. No more PTO games. Mason's chair creaked. You can't just cut me out of my own account. It's not your account, the CEO said, voice flat. It's the company's. And right now the company needs someone Soliton will answer. He turned to me again. Can you be at Soliton tomorrow? Yes. Take Priya, he added. Whatever you ask for, she gets. Priya lifted her gaze, surprise flashing into something like relief. We'll make a list, she said. The CEO closed the letter, squared it with the edge of the table. We'll reconvene in 72 hours, he said. Bring back a path to calm. I stood. My hands weren't shaking. I noticed that. Mason avoided my eyes. As I walked back to my seat, he muttered, low enough to pretend it wasn't for me. Enjoy your vacation. I slipped the duplicate letter into my tote. It won't be one, I said. On my way out, the lawyer caught my arm. Thank you, he said simply. No flourish, just the thing itself. It landed deeper than praise. In the elevator, Priya pressed the button for the lobby and stared at our reflections in the chrome. You okay? She asked. I'm tired, I said, but I'm done being invisible. We rode down in quiet. Somewhere above us, slides were still frozen on relationship excellence. Below, a client was waiting for someone to act like the word meant something. The following morning, my alarm went off at 5. I'd barely slept, my mind running through scenarios. What questions Soliton would ask, what proof they'd demand, what promises I could make without overstepping. My suitcase sat by the door, a plain black carry-on packed with 2 blazers, flats, and the duplicate folder I wasn't letting out of sight. When I reached the office, Priya was already there. She had 2 coffees balanced in one hand, her laptop bag in the other. You ready? She asked, handing me the stronger one. As ready as I'll ever be. We drove to the airport in silence, each of us scrolling through emails, flagging the newest complaints in red. By the time the plane lifted off, my inbox had 4 more. 1 order late, 1 invoice error, 2 escalations, all Soliton. By noon, we were in a rented sedan, the kind with the smell of disinfectant baked into the upholstery. Soliton's campus was spread over 3 squat buildings with mirrored glass, surrounded by a parking lot full of pickup trucks and a few weary sedans. No glossy headquarters, no fountain out front, just quiet efficiency. Marin met us in the lobby. She shook Priya's hand, then mine. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharper than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure your company would take us seriously." "They should have," I answered. "We do." She led us through the plant. The air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. We walked past workers in navy coveralls, some nodding as we passed, others too focused on their consoles. Every few minutes, Marin stopped to point out an issue. A shipment delayed by customs, a calibration sensor overdue, a replacement part they'd been waiting on for 6 weeks. I scribbled everything down. Priya typed as fast as her fingers allowed. At one point, Marin stopped in front of a pallet half-wrapped in plastic. "This order was due to ship out Tuesday. It's Thursday." I checked the tag. The carrier had signed in, but no pickup. "Driver shortage," I said. "I'll call dispatch myself." "See?" she said quietly. "This is why we asked you to come." After the tour, we sat in a windowless conference room with a humming HVAC unit and a coffee pot that had seen better years. Marin opened a binder, thick with tabs. "Here's our reality," she said. "We like your company. We've worked together a long time, but every delay costs us credibility. We can't afford to explain to our clients why we're stuck waiting on parts you promised." I nodded. "Understood." She flipped to a page marked in red. "This is the last quarter we'll tolerate without guarantees." We're not bluffing. Starkline is courting us aggressively. Oren has already run a pilot order. Both are hungry and both are offering terms. My chest tightened. "What would it take to keep you?" Marin leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Commitment. Not just emails. Not just promises. A contract with penalties that hurt if you fail. A person on our account who answers, no matter the hour. And the sense that when we speak, someone listens." I glanced at Priya, then back at Marin. "We can draft a contract with service-level guarantees. We'll assign a dedicated escalation path. Me and Priya, directly. If there's a miss, you'll know who's responsible." She studied me for a long moment. "Do you actually have the authority to make that promise?" I hesitated, then told the truth. "Not officially. But I have the attention of our CEO. You gave me that with your letter. He's listening now." Something softened in her expression, just a little. "Good. Because we won't wait long." That night, Priya and I sat in the hotel bar, papers spread out between empty glasses of water. She rubbed her temples. "If we don't get leadership to sign this, it's over. You know that, right?" "I know." She gave a dry laugh. "Funny how a $1,500 trip is the line between stability and collapse." "It's never about the money," I said. "It's about whether they think you're worth showing up for." The next morning, we met Soliton again and walked through a draft framework. They asked questions, pushed back on penalties, circled deadlines in thick red ink. By the end, we had the outline of an agreement. Not signed, not binding, but solid enough to prove intent. Marin closed her binder. "We'll wait to see if your company stands behind you. If they do, we'll stay. If they don't..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. On the flight home, Priya leaned against the window, eyes closed. I sat rigid, folder in my lap, mind racing through what came next. The CEO had given me temporary authority, but Mason wasn't finished. I could feel it. He'd find a way to spin this, to claim the trip was reckless, unnecessary. He'd stand in front of the board and say relationship excellence until someone believed him. I stared out the window at the patchwork fields below, the clouds casting long shadows. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a fixer patching holes. I was the hinge. The one decision that would decide whether we kept our biggest client or watched them walk. And I knew exactly how Mason would react when he realized it wasn't his hands on the hinge anymore. The boardroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was me. I sat at the long mahogany table with my folder resting on my lap, while Mason prowled at the front, laser pointer flashing across another slide full of upward arrows and empty words. Legacy partnerships are rock solid, he boomed. Soliton is locked in. 2 more years minimum. I gripped the folder tighter. 2 more years? He hadn't even read the draft agreement Priya and I had hammered out in that windowless room. He was bluffing with nothing but confidence and recycled bullet points. Then the courier walked in. Tan envelope in hand. Confidential, addressed to the CEO. The room hushed as he handed it over. The CEO unfolded the letter. His jaw tightened as he read. The lawyer leaned over, scanning the page. A minute later, his voice cut through the silence. Where is she? Every head turned. I set the folder on the table and stood. My chair scraped back, echoing in the stunned quiet. I'm here. Mason blinked like he'd been slapped. Ellen? What are you doing? The CEO slid the letter toward me. Do you have something to add? I opened my folder. Inside were copies of the draft framework Priya and I had prepared with Soliton. I laid them out, page by page, in front of the CEO. 2 weeks ago, Soliton warned us. They're done with excuses. They wanted someone present, someone accountable. Mason denied the trip. Mason's face flushed. Because it was unnecessary. It wasn't unnecessary. I cut in, voice steady. It was survival. I went anyway. On my own time, on my own dime. Priya came too. We met with Marin and her team. This, I tapped the draft agreement, is the only reason they haven't already signed with Starkline. The lawyer picked up the papers, reading quickly. His brow furrowed, then eased. This matches the letter, he said quietly. Intent to continue, contingent on signed guarantees. The CEO's gaze sharpened. And you're telling me this trip was denied by Mason? Mason sputtered. I thought it was a vacation. $1,500 wasted. $1,500, I repeated, to secure a client worth 30% of our revenue. That's the price you thought was too high. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of the overhead lights. One of the board members cleared his throat. If she hadn't gone, they'd be gone already, I said. Orders shifted. Contracts signed with competitors. We'd be discussing losses today, not possibilities. The CEO leaned back, eyes never leaving me. You risked this on your own? I swallowed hard. I didn't see another choice. They needed someone to listen. I chose to listen. Mason tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. She overstepped. She doesn't have authority. The lawyer cut him off. Authority or not, she has results. Soliton's letter makes that clear. The CEO closed the folder slowly, like he was sealing something permanent. Then he turned to Mason. You assured me Soliton was secure. You dismissed a critical request. You nearly cost us our largest client. Mason's mouth opened, then closed. His confidence, that endless performance, crumbled under the weight of the silence. The CEO shifted his gaze back to me. Ellen, you saved this partnership. At your own expense, I nodded once. My throat was tight, but I held his gaze. I did what needed to be done. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the CEO tapped the folder. You'll take point on finalizing this agreement. Effective immediately, Mason tried again, desperation leaking into his tone. You can't be serious. She doesn't... Enough. The CEO snapped. I want results, not excuses. The meeting moved on, but for me it had already ended. My hands shook slightly as I gathered my papers, sliding them back into the folder. I wasn't smiling. Not yet. But something in me had shifted. For years I'd been invisible, the quiet fixer in the corner. Now, my name was spoken in the room where decisions lived. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen, the same table where I'd stared at that first letter in silence. My dog dozed at my feet. I poured a glass of water, looked at my reflection in the dark window, and let the reality settle in. It hadn't been about a trip. Not really. It was about what it meant to be valued, about how easily people like Mason confuse silence with weakness, or thrift with wisdom. $1,500. That was the hill he chose to stand on. And in the end, it cost him everything.